Boy, hello, hi, friends and relatives. It is me, Raymond Jordan Johnson Brown, and this is another episode of The Glorious Mess. I am so excited by how this season is looking. There are so many rich and impactful conversations of folks who are on their healing journeys. We all have a story to tell. We are all doing the work to continue to feel and be our best, absolute best selves. So I'm really excited, and I'm even more excited because when we talk about healing, something that gets missed in a lot of pathways is spirit and the connection to one's spirit, whatever that might be or look like for you. And so today's guest, and we're going to get into a little bit of ceremony and life and grieving, is none other than my favorite cousin.
Do you see that, Sterling?
My favorite cousin. Do you see that, Sterling? You get the official title. How do you feel about that?
I'm ambiguous about it. I like being a favorite cousin, you know.
I'm always like,
I was like,
what's the technical? We are cousins, but then I was always like, I remember growing up, we had Peter was the same age as us, but he's technically our uncle.
I'm actually like a bit older than Pete too, so.
Are you actually?
Yeah, so I'm like older than one of my uncles.
Well, I swear I know. I knew that.
Well, I swear I know. I knew that.
So
no, I didn't know that. That's so funny.
But anyway, I'm really excited to dive deep in a bunch of different things and see kind of how we'll talk a bit about like sweat ceremonies and ceremony and like the complexity of grieving and you know, a lot of just amazing things I think to showcase you and your story, and our listeners are going to just get to know Sterling a bit more. So I'm excited for that.
Hey, I'm ready to share too, you know?
Yeah.
Talking about it's been something different for me, but here we go.
And so I've been asking everyone at the top of these episodes what does this word trauma mean for you? What do you think of that T word?
So trauma for me is like, I'm a very literal person. So like I don't want to go. I'm not, you know, I don't want to quote you the textbook definition per se, but it's a very literal thing for me. It's very tied to grief. So it's very like in the event, in the moment, and just it's basically traumatic events within your life that change your path through not just emotional pain, but eventually emotional growth, right? So.
I love that. And this idea of like, it feels uncomfortable. It's not always enjoyable.
It's
very true. I agree.
And so I wanted to see off the top if we can go into a little bit when we think of trauma and pathways to heal trauma. I know we had touched base about like and talked about our experiences in like a sweat lodge, a sweat ceremony. And I wondered if you wanted to give listeners just a bit of an introduction to what exactly is that?
So there's a lot of answers when you talk about like what is a sweat ceremony. Like, well, a lot of people will tell you that it's an emulation of the womb, or a spiritual place to get in touch with your ancestors, or a place to pray and heal and, you know, be part of culture and ceremony. And the reality is that all those answers are right, and there really is no wrong answer. It's more about what is like sweat for you within that realm, because it is a traditional cultural like ceremony, right? So like there is sort of a realm that it lives in when you're answering that question, what is a sweat? So it really comes down to like a personal experience, but for me and what I was taught, it's basically like sweat is a sacred ceremony in which we can be closer to our ancestors, and it's warm and dark like the womb, because that's where we were when we were last closest to our ancestors, was when we were still growing in the womb and still mostly spirit, right? So it's a way to get just around that and to sort of get closer to our ancestors.
And when was your? How old were you when you?
And when was your? How old were you when you? Like, what was your first sweat?
It's hard to say. really. I think around 9 or 10 years old was the first time I really experienced it, that I went with mom. It was the earliest one I can remember. I lasted half a round and they had to open the flap and let me out, and it was too hot. I was too young. The first time I really experienced a full sweat would be when I can't remember the first year I went, whether I was 13 or 14, but when I went to Ghost River Rediscovery camp. It's not around, that company's not around anymore, but that was a big experience for me. But in speaking to the sweat for now, that was my first full one. I went through all 4 rounds and came out of it and really experienced the full sort of cleanse feeling of it. Right, every round you come out, you feel a little bit lighter and sort of cleaner, and because not only is it like a spiritual connection and a ceremonial connection, but like you sweat a lot.
Yeah.
So like scientifically, you sweat out toxins and things like that, and that are living in your skin and parts of your body. So it is a very cleansing and sort of intrinsic experience in a physical way, and also you feel lighter in an emotional and sort of psychological way. So it's an interesting experience.
No, 100%. And for those of you who don't know, when you're going into a sweat and a sweat lodge, you'll go. What's happening and why it's so hot is because you've got the stones that are ablaze, and your firekeeper is bringing however many rocks the elder suggests or proposes to bring. You bring it in, and then water is poured onto these hot smoldering. Is that the word I want to use? Yeah.
Smoldering. Is that the word I want to use? Yeah.
And
typically,
pardon me.
Typically too, and it depends like where you go in for a sweat, and like what group you're going with, and whether they're Cree, Blackfoot, Anishinaabe, or whatever. But typically the rocks are called like grandfathers, or like they show us respect because they're part of the guidance through the ceremony, right? So.
And the grandfather rocks, the oldest.
And the grandfather rocks, the oldest ancestors.
And so when the water's poured, then obviously steam is produced, and then during those each round, depending on your elder, and again depending on the nation where you are, there is sometimes it's singing, sometimes it's prayer. One time we shared, and I remember I was feeling quite hot this day, and someone was telling their story, and it was so slow.
It was so slow.
and I was like, I need to get out. No, I have to sit through this. I need to. It was a long round, let me tell you. It was like 30, 45 minutes, this one round. It was, I felt quite cleansed after that, let me tell you.
A lot of people say too that the heat of the round depends on like the intensity of what people are in there to let go of as well, right? So like it has to deal with the emotion that is released in there. That makes it hotter, right?
And we were all like frontline, child family service, like heavy shit.
Heavy shit.
We needed this.
So there was, we needed that. We do.
And that ceremony is so. Like you had said to me when we did our pre-meeting around no two sweats are the same, and like what's released, what comes up. It's like fresh every time, even though sometimes the ceremony itself, the skeleton, if you will, can be the same. 4 rounds.
Be the same,
bring your offerings, things like that. But
no
sweats. No two sweats are the same for the individual's experience.
Absolutely, yeah. So like, there have been times where I was just in there with my eyes closed and being part of the ceremony, singing the songs and doing the, typically a lot of times they'll have a round where everybody sort of introduces themselves, where you're from, and your name, your typical name, and maybe your traditional name if you have one. And then, you start to go through the rounds, and there have been ones where I just kind of went through those motions and was there to sort of feel a more physical cleansing experience. And then there have been other times where, you sit there with your eyes open and you look for things. Because me being a logical person, I like to try and experience spiritual things so that I can feel that spiritual connection, because it's hard to keep it alive for me, being like super logical and very academically minded and based, right? Like it's there's a side of me that says like, you know, like leaning on science, it's the odds are not great, and there's never really been any evidence to or for or against the existence of life after death, right? So it's just being involved in these spiritual situations and having my eyes open and actually seeing what seems to be spirits cross in front of you in the dark, in the blackness, is an interesting experience as well.
Mm-hmm. And that, because I mean, I think we're raised, you know, like your academic thought, like in the Western world, you know, we go to school, like we're taught to, everything is empirical. Everything we see is therefore truth. That's what the foundations of so much knowledge is in this Western world. But yeah, when you go into these spaces, you're like, it's connected to that spirit, the thing that you can't sometimes even form into words. It's so much deeper. And so I wondered, I know you'd shared about like, it brought you into like a very self-reflective space, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that was the other type of experience. I was like, I was going to mention there was, it's very self-reflective. You get in there, and even though you can be in there with a large group, sometimes 15 to 20 people, it's a very personal experience, especially if it's a lower amount of people and you're not really kind of touching anybody or you feel close to anybody, you know, like you feel like it's just you and the song in there, and you start to look inward, right, and reflect on maybe things you've done recently or more far back in the past that, you know, maybe you're not proud of, or things that you are proud of, and it sort of becomes this mix of exploring yourself that you don't really expect to have, right, and just kind of a lot of it for me was like. And it sounds cheesy, but the dichotomy of like good and evil, you know, like am I good? Am I evil? Am I bad? Am I heroic? Am I this? Am I that? And it's like finding that place of when you look in and reflect on yourself, and finding that place of sort of right down the middle. Mm-hmm. When you look at those experiences and just realizing that like everybody else, like all people, you're not really good or bad. You're just kind of you. You're a person, right? Like, and you're just a person trying to deal with the things that life throws at everybody, you know, like, and that's not to discredit anybody's journey or struggles and say that, you know, everybody goes through crap and it is what it is, but like, it's just, we're all living our own journey and walking along our own path, and like, is anybody really good or evil in a sense, or are they just kind of doing what they've learned to do with their life, you know?
I would say good or bad is subjective, right? Like, subjective. $100, you know, do you remember that time we found $100, by the way, at Deerfoot Outlet Mall? Sorry, that just came to me. Let's use that example. When we found that cash outside the mall, like, for us it was good, but for that person who lost that money, it would have been bad, right? But at the end of the day, the act was the same. It was the same thing. And so it's really dependent on like, this is where like positionality, like depends on your position, your thing. And so when it comes to like, again, the going through grieving and loss and experiencing loss, what role did, like, how important was culture for you in those moments when you had to go through these obstacles?
These obstacles.
Extremely important. One of the biggest ones I lean on, and that like honestly really makes me feel a lot better in the moment, something that I can do immediately, is smudge. Right? And it's an immediate calming sensation, and it really feels like a place of comfort and a prayer and also like leaning back on the matriarchal culture of like just Indigenous peoples in general, right? Like, I have multiple aunts and my mom, and you know, a lot of people that I can call on in those moments. And culturally speaking, that's not a whole lot different from a lot of cultures around the world, but it is something that is indicative of Indigenous culture here in Canada. And especially within the Cree Nation, it's a very matriarchal society, right? So having that strength and that knowledge and that power to sort of lean back on, and as well as ceremony and practice, is really powerful in those moments.
And I just learned this.
Just told me it.
Someone just told me it. When was that?
Maybe 2 months ago. But I didn't know that sage was female medicine.
Sage was female medicine.
It was. I was at we were in Toronto.
Where were we? We're in Toronto.
And so there was. Anyway, but sage. So when you're talking about like matriarchs and like.
So when you're talking about like matriarchs and like.
It's I guess a feminine.
I guess a feminine. Anyway.
Who knew? I didn't know.
I didn't know.
I also learned actually with smudging.
With smudging.
Was that? I got in trouble because I blew because sometimes the fire didn't quite light, and I blew into it, and I got in trouble. She said it was my friend Nicole. She said no. She's like, if you blow into the smudge, like it's like you're blowing into the face of the spirits. And I was like,
of the spirits, and I was like,
I never thought about it like that.
I never thought about it like that.
And so she was
like, I haven't personally heard that one, but then again, we don't like, we always use like a feather anyways, right? So I've never come across a situation where I was like needed to, I like, and it's, if you don't have a feather, you kind of do this one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like using the head.
Exactly.
It was, I don't know where my mind was, but in my head I was like, I was like, oh, it's almost out, and I'm like, just give it a little blow.
Your mind's probably on campfires, right?
Which
one? Your mind is probably on campfires. That's how you relight campfires, right?
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? You're like,
the logical mind says that, but then she had taught me that. And I think that's like such a beautiful thing to this project I had worked on, because it was like so many different teachings and nations coming together. And I think like that's the beauty, is that like I don't think any, each nation has their own way of doing things, and all of their stories and ways of being, and language is so informed by like the natural lands with which that nation is situated. So it's always interesting, I think, to learn and see just different pathways.
Different pathways.
Absolutely.
I also so this is on. I learned this. I can't believe I never knew. So you went to camp every year, right? It was in Saskatchewan, you said?
Right, it was in Saskatchewan, you said?
No, it was in Kananaskis.
Oh, okay, Kananaskis.
It was
Indigenous camp?
Indigenous.
Yeah. So it's about 2 hours outside of Calgary. That's the one I was talking about earlier, was Ghost River Rediscovery. That was a really formative place for me, and some really formative years. So I was there for 4 years as a participant, and then I was there for 2 summers as, separate zones. For 4 summers as a participant, and two summers as a counselor, right? And I met some people that I've known for like years and years now from there, and also just it's a place where I really started to get in touch with my culture and the ceremony, right? Because like it was a very like hard grit survival kind of type camp, right? Like we stayed in teepees, and we built a fire every morning and cooked over it, and we went down to the river, and we boiled and filtered our water, and we chopped the firewood. We all had chores, right? And like it was a very interesting experience, and like there were ways in which they would teach us, like for instance, how to make a tripod. So you can hang a pot and boil water, right, over a fire. How to make a fire, how to build a basic shelter with a tarp and some rope and stuff like that. How to cook a potato in a fire with just wrapped in tinfoil, and then we would do sweat ceremony twice every time we stayed there, and it was all sort of lessons in preparation for sort of a 24-hour solo where they would like almost emulate a vision quest, right? So how it would work is we'd go there, and the first day you go there, everybody picks what they call a spirit spot. And every day we'd spend an hour there, just kind of reflecting on the day near the end of the day there, and then for one 24-hour period out of the time we were there, we would essentially have, we call it a 24-hour solo, and it was to sort of emulate a vision quest. Now, in a vision quest, you go out with basically nothing and you just survive. But obviously, in modern times, that's kind of difficult to do in a camp situation where people have paid you to take their children out into the wilderness, right?
And
so,
how old were you too?
You have to do it safely, right? So, we get out there and you build your little shelter and you build your fire and you cook your potato and you hang out, and we would scream and screech to each other because you're within earshot of camp. You're just out of sight, right? Like, you're not very far. We're all within 10-second running distance in case a bear or something came out of there, because we were like in the middle of the woods, right? Like, it's not like a section fenced off campground. It's just a little camp in the middle of the woods, right? But so. Yeah, those were very interesting experiences for me. And we'd always have a sweat before and after the solo. That was our 2 sweats, right? So, and the sweat was like just to cleanse us before, so that, the bad spirits would stay away, and then we could have a blissful experience. And it's interesting because one of the biggest ways that this camp was informative was it's directly involved in how I got my very first traditional name. During one of these 24-hour solos, I had made it through the night, and it was the next morning, and I was lighting my fire, and I was going to cook the other half of my potato for breakfast, and I'm sitting there, and about 20-30 yards straight off in the distance, this wolf kind of steps out of the bush and is like looking at me, and I'm like, I've always been fascinated by wolves all my life, so like, I know what this is, right? Like, if you've ever seen Jurassic Park, the idea of how raptors hunt, they got that from wolves. Because that's exactly how wolves generally do it. They distract you from a distance and then come at you from the side. So right away I'm looking around, and there were 3 or 4 of them around me. And they just kind of sat with me for like 3 hours until the horn went off and we all went back. Because I was feeling kind of like anxious at that point for some reason, and just not good, and I was going to go in early, and I was feeling kind of like not great about myself about not finishing the 24-hour solo that year, and that's when this sort of happened, and I came out of there. And that's what I told Casey Eagle Speaker, was the man who gave me my first traditional name, and I told him that story just before a sweat one day, and we were talking, and then we had that sweat that day, and we went out, and then the next time I came to a sweat, I asked him to ask the grandfather just for a name for me. And we sat in the sweat, and he said, he told me a story last time you came, and the last time, and he said their grandfathers were kind of laughing because those wolves weren't there to hurt you. You shouldn't have been scared, right? Like, they were there to protect you, to make you stay for the rest of that 24-hour solo so you could finish it and give you strength, right? And so because of that, your name is simply Wolf, which is Apitzi in Blackfoot and Mahican in Cree.
I love that. I never
very formative experience in terms of like my traditional identity.
In
that place, and my connection with ceremony, and my culture really was like the foundation is really there in that part, and like as well as with my nana, right, who was where I got most of my traditional teaching as a young kid, but it's hard to remember that stuff, that's under years and years and years of just grief and and life. So it's hard to remember those earlier teachings, but very cemented in Ghost River for me. That's where it started, and that's where my interest lived. Yeah.
So weird.
Sorry about that.
All right. I still lost you on video right now, but.
Yeah, no, okay, but you were back.
Yeah,
sorry
no,
about
okay,
that.
but you
technical
were back.
difficulty.
Sorry
It
about
just
that.
shut
Little technical
down.
difficulty. It just
Weird.
shut down.
So weird. Sorry, but you were
So
saying
weird. Sorry,
about
but you were saying
like getting your
about
traditional name and the
getting
wolves
your
that
traditional name
were
and the
encircling
wolves
you,
that
and they were there to
were
protect you,
encircling
right?
you, and they were there to protect you, right?
And so yeah, Ghost River just kind of really became like the root of my traditional identity, and just where that sort of came from for me. Aside from also my nana, but I don't really remember a lot of that because it's beyond sort of just a lot of years of like grief and trauma and life, and memories and also good times. But yeah. So Ghost River is really a place where I feel that I sort of began with my cultural identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how would you say that these, the Vision Quest, Ghost River, the Sweat, how does that inform who you are now?
So it, what it really taught me is like there's like teachings and knowledge and ceremony to lean on, which I do nowadays, and it's like it's a very much a real part of maybe not always daily ritual. Smudging for sure is daily, right? But most of it is like not always like super daily, but just sort of become part of my structure for I don't always like to say happiness, because being happy all the time is just, it's unrealistic, right? But like it's become a structure for my positive mental health. There we go. It's become part of that framework, getting in there. And it's like when I have a slightly stressful moment, instead of where one person might go have a beer, smoke a joint, whatever, I like to go smudge and get my head clear first, and then smoke a joint, but yeah. It's ceremony of the way first. You can't do it, stoned.
Yeah. No, honestly, I appreciate that. That's amazing. And I think people who are listening to this episode will know, we'll get a little bit more insight into just some of the ceremonies that can exist. And I think, there's ceremonies, and anyone listening, there's ceremonies too in other cultures. Like if you're non-Indigenous, there might be ceremonies and rituals that your people participate in. And when you're going through grief, you're going through loss, and you're trying to reclaim your identity, whatever that is for you. Ceremony is a beautiful, I think, and powerful practice. And I wondered, Joe, do you want, as we come to a close of this episode, is there any kind of final closing thoughts you want to share with folks who are listening?
I'd say keep going, whether it's ceremony or dancing, music, or writing, or gaming, whatever have you, whatever your escape is or your happy place is, just keep going with that, because it does get better. Like I've been down to a place where if I'd been successful, I wouldn't be here today, and it's not fun. It's a hard place to be in, I get it, but I kept going, and it got better.
Bit by bit, it gets better.
It
gets better. Well, so I appreciate you. I love you dearly. Thank you so much for being here for this episode. Thank you, everyone at home or wherever you happen to be listening to this wonderful podcast. Thank you. I appreciate you. Check out other episodes, and if you're on Instagram, follow us at The Only Glorious Mess. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.
Whoa, that's great.